Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Monday, May 12th, 2025, and we're here this afternoon for a work session with Community Planning, Infrastructure, and Resources. I'm Kristen Stevens, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. With me is my fellow Commissioner, John Kafalis. Commissioner Shattuck McNally is away this week. We also have our County Manager, Lorenda Volker, with us. And I will turn things over to our Community Planning, Infrastructure, and Resources Director, Leslie Ellis, to talk about what's on today's agenda.
All right, thank you, and good afternoon, commissioners and everybody. We have a few short items for this afternoon's agenda. Item one, the conservation easement topic, will come back to you at an admin matters for final decision, and then part of item two will also involve a further decision. So with no further ado, I'll hand it off to Megan Flanagan and Justin Core to talk about the conservation easement item.
Okay, thank you. And good afternoon, Megan Flanagan with Natural Resources. And we wanted to share with you this topic because you will be seeing it, as Leslie mentioned, coming up probably on consent agenda. And just to share with you a little bit about this particular conservation easement amendment, but put it in context with when and how we decide about amending a conservation easement. Because for us, it's a really big deal. We don't do them customarily, and we have a very specific policy that we submit to be accredited to hold conservation easements that we follow when a landowner comes to us about an amendment or it arises in some fashion. And basically what the policy looks like is a set of principles around amending a conservation easement. They're listed here. The key ones are that they're consistent with the original intent of that conservation easement. One that comes up most common is that there's a net beneficial or neutral effect of the conservation easement and the values that we're protecting under that easement. One is that it doesn't result in private benefit in doing the amendment or a conflict of interest. All of our conservation easements are perpetual, and so we will not amend an easement to be less than perpetual. The next about jeopardizing our status as a conservation easement holder. So we do have a lot of different documents that we submit for that accreditation, and it can't negatively impact another element of that. We work, as you know, a lot with Great Outdoors Colorado and other partners, so it would have to also match the amendment policy of those partners. In this case, the Little Ponderosa Conservation Easement was GOCO funded, and we've already worked with them on this particular one. And then that it's consistent with the following criteria or circumstances. And those circumstances are sometimes within a conservation easement, it's already known that, hey, something's going to change in 15 years. At that time, we do want to amend this easement. There may be a prior agreement in place about an amendment. Often, the best practices or language in conservation easements does change, sometimes from the state, maybe through GOCO or another partner. So if we go to update outdated language, that's a circumstance we often find ourselves in. Correcting errors, settling a condemnation, that's not one we've ever dealt with. Leveraging additional conservation outcomes, and it's red here because that's actually the case with this Stepudis conservation easement, or reconfiguring some of the terms of the easement would be another circumstance. That's probably one of the primary ones, but again, it cannot conflict with any of the criteria on the previous slide. So with that, I'll turn it over to Justin to share more of the details about what we're looking to do with the Little Ponderosa, or Stepudis is the name of the landowner, that conservation easement.
Commissioner Cavallis has a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Megan. I'm just curious, what is the process, or what has been the process for determining these principles, which all seem very good principles, and how often do we review these principles to determine whether or not there needs to be any kind of update?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. This policy, as well as all of our other policies around being a conservation easement holder, We established at the time of the Open Lands Master Plan update, which was in 2015. Each of those policies was brought forth to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation from the Open Lands Advisory Board. We do have to update our accreditation annually, so we do send that in with a check to the state annually to make sure that all of our policies are in line with what the State Division of Conservation requires as well.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, Justin Core, Senior Land Agent in Engineering. So related to this particular conservation easement amendment in this project, as Megan mentioned, this is the Little Ponderosa Ranch conservation easement owned by the Stepudis family. On this map, it's shown in red up near the upper left of the map. It's an 884-acre ranch that's adjacent to the west boundary of Red Mountain open space, up near the Wyoming line, just to give you kind of the lay of the land. So this is zooming in on the ranch. This was a conservation easement that we acquired in 2020, so not that long ago. The three in holdings that are circled in yellow there in the middle of the ranch are really the main reason for the amendment. Those are being included in the conservation easement. So when we did this easement originally, those parcels, as well as the one to the west, were owned by a third party. So those were in holdings owned by another owner within this ranch. So the owner of the property was able to acquire those in 2022, so 2 years after we did the conservation easement, and it's his goal to incorporate those into the conservation easement. So as Megan mentioned, this was a project funded partially by Great Outdoors Colorado. It was part of the Larimer Foothills Mountains to Plains grant that the county was awarded in, I think, 2019. We also have partnership funding from the city of Fort Collins, Friends of Larimer County, and there was a partial landowner donation associated with this conservation easement acquisition, where the owner sold the conservation easement to the county for less than the fair market value and used that difference between fair market value and the sale price as the basis for tax benefits. So as I mentioned, they were able to acquire these in holdings, which total about 4.5 acres. In 2023, they restored those properties. So there was a cabin, a septic system, some other outbuildings associated with those parcels. And those have all been removed and the ground's been restored. And the idea with the amendment is to include those 3 parcels in the conservation easement so they can never be subdivided out or sold separately from the remainder of the ranch into the future, and that they can't be built on. So there was one residential development right associated with those parcels, which the conservation easement will remove. In addition to the inclusion of that acreage into the conservation easement, the amendment also allows for the construction of one non-residential barn to support the agricultural use of the property. And that's got a square footage limit, and it's got to be located in an area that's already accessible by existing roads and not in the viewshed of County Road 37. So that's all done to protect the conservation values associated with the easement. And as Megan mentioned, one of the key goals of an amendment is to ensure that it has benefit to the conservation values, which we're doing here by removing one of those residential development rights, keeping all of the land intact with the remainder of the ranch, and also cleaning some things up to kind of just better describe where the agricultural improvements can be located. So with that, I think that kind of covers the gist of what we're doing with the amendment. As Megan mentioned, these are in perpetuity. And we don't do amendments very often, but occasionally there is a legitimate need to do an amendment. And of course, being able to add land into a conservation easement is one of the best reasons for an amendment to update the conservation easement. So this will be on, I believe, consent in probably the next couple of weeks. So we just wanted to bring it to you to see if you had any questions, to make sure you understood kind of the goal of the amendment, and to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Justin. Commissioner, questions? Go ahead.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and thank you, Justin. And you may have stated this, and perhaps it went past me, and that is, does GOCO Colorado have to sign off on these amendments? And you may have stated it, I may have missed it.
Well, they do. So as part of this conservation easement, since they provided some grant funding for the acquisition, there is language in the conservation easement that requires their approval for any amendment, which we have secured for this.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I have any questions. I appreciate you bringing this forward, and it is interesting because I don't know that we've done an amendment since we've been commissioners. Okay. That's what I thought. So it's good to know the parameters around which we can do an amendment. This certainly seems like a good reason to do one, right? It's a net positive, and it sounds like most amendments would be. But acquiring the additional land, not having any, regulations. I mean, they were sort of these enclaves, and so would have been hard if, to do anything. And if people wanted to build on those, they still could have. So it eliminates that possibility. So a very positive, amendment for sure. And I look forward to seeing it on consent in a couple weeks.
Great. Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both. Our next item is our annual cost of living adjustments to our fees that take effect July 1st. And there's two parts to this. So we'll start with the building and planning and engineering development review fees, and then we'll go on to the transportation, construction, engineering fees piece of it. And there's two separate paths for each of these also. So we'll explain that as we go forward. So I think I'm handing it to you or Eric. Okay, Eric.
Eric Freed, Larimer County Building Official. Hopefully this is the easy part. Just to remind the commissioners about our annual adjustments to building permit fees. Back in 2008, during the Great Recession, the Board of Commissioners passed a resolution authorizing the building division to adjust its fees every year based on the cost of living, which is what we've done since then. On May 24, 2022, the board also let us put another fee table in there. That was our new electrical permit fee table, which only came into effect in 2020, and we wanted a year to see how that worked. And then in December 2023, you all approved a new fee schedule for planning and engineering development review fees. It gave them the same authorization to annually adjust their fees based on the Regional Consumer Price Index. So last year, the Regional Consumer Price Index rose 2.27%, which is better than the prior years when it was 5.22 and 8.01%. So as of July 1st, we are just planning to raise the building and engineering and planning development review fees, the 2.27% based on the cost of living. So just bringing that to your attention. Don't know if you had any questions or comments about that.
Do you have any questions, Commissioner?
I do not have any questions. Thank you for bringing the matter to our attention and for the memo that we received.
And then I'll sit down and let engineering handle the more complex part of their fee increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
And Mark and Stephen will take on the transportation capital expansion fee adjustment, the TCEF adjustments. So hand it off to you, Mark, as soon as you're ready.
Sorry. Mark Peterson, County Engineer. And also at the table is Stephen Rothwell you know him from all the work that he's done in the past at Development Review. He's moved over into project management, capital projects side of the engineering department, but he's got a lot of experience and actually prepared some of the graphics that we'll be displaying that chart our transportation capital expansion fees. Tracy Shambo would be here. She's on vacation today, so the whole capital expansion fee program falls under her work group in the department. What we do is we look at the Colorado CDOT Construction Cost Index, and that's what our expansion fees are tied to. It's an expansion fee. It applies to new traffic generating activity. Those fees are married up with other funding sources to fund road improvement projects across our transportation network. The land use makes provision for if the fee calculated adjustment is more than 5%, it comes to you folks for your decision. If it's less than 5% increase or change, it would be handled administratively. We have a bit of a challenge, or not a challenge, but we want to take history into account as we discuss what we do with this fee. So that goes to this next graph. And I'll let Stephen actually explain what you're looking at, because we're really focused on the right side of that chart that shows the calculated increase last year and then what was adopted and how that relates to this year's calculation.
Thank you. Stephen Rothwell, Larimer County Engineering. So we bring this chart to you every year, and it seems to get more complex every year we bring it to you. So I do apologize, but we have this graph really illustrates two things. One, there's a cumulative effect of where our TCFs have gone in increases or decreases since their inception. And that inception point is at the very far left side. We don't need to scroll to that now. And then as we've increased those fees over the years, whether it be due to annual adjustments like we're bringing before you today, or through new studies, those are tracked here. So and then additionally to that, the bar graphs themselves, those show the actual percentage increase or decrease for that year. So those correspond to the jumps in the line work between each annual year. So in 2022, we brought to the board a fairly significant increase of 22.4%, and it was a big hit to all of us. We were all pretty surprised at it, but that's where the industry was moving. You did decide to adopt that fee in full, that adjustment in full. And then the next year, when we ran the numbers, it was shown at 17%. That surprised us a little bit. We had anticipated that was going to come down a little bit, but from CDOT's calculations, it didn't. We took that to admin matters and presented it for you, and we provided a few different options on what you could do. We provided we make no change alternative. We provided let's implement the full amount alternative. And ultimately it was decided that we were gonna shoot for a middle ground and adopt a 10% increase that year. And which did leave us, based on CDOT's calculations, at approximately 7% deficiency. So if we use CDOT's calculations, we're starting from behind, essentially. So as we go into this year, if we would have adopted that full 17% last year, that final catch-up or that lagging indicator that we follow because we use that 8-quarter moving average would have actually decreased our fee structure by 2.77%. So if we would have gone up by 17, we would have came down by 2.77. Now, since we didn't adopt that full 17, we'd like to take this opportunity to catch up on those that 7% that we did not implement last year, which all the math sorted out would be a resulting 4.44 increase this year. And I know that's a lot of numbers and data thrown at you, so.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. I must say, if I understood Mark Peterson correctly, we'll miss you at our land use hearings. My question, there's two ways of framing the question. One is, what were the practical implications of that deficiency that you pointed out? In other words, when we decided to go with 10% rather than 17, there was a deficiency. So the question is, how did that impact our operations? And then by catching up, I guess the flip side of that is how will that improve, how we serve the public and so forth? I hope that makes sense, colleagues.
Well, yeah, I think I understand. If we had stayed with the CDOT index, our fees would have gone up by 17%. So by adopting a 10% increase on fees, we effectively collected 7% less.
And how does that impact what we do?
Well, I mean, we collect about a $1.3 million in total fees, so that's probably $100,000 less collected that we could use for transportation projects. It varies from year to year based on development activities, but you're collecting slightly less than you would otherwise be collecting from new development if we had stayed with the full adjustment.
So those fees actually they are available to help fund projects,
Yeah, it goes directly to projects on the road.
not necessarily salaries or anything like that.
They're not used for
Okay, that's
staff
helpful.
or any salaries. It's projects delivered in construction on the road.
So in the end, by catching up, of course, that means there's more money available to invest in these projects.
Correct.
Understood. Thank you.
I mean, your other option would be and the other thing we said in the memo is we are in the process of updating our capital expansion fee calculations. So it's not going to be, the adjustments currently are tied to the index change. We're going to go in and reassess the fees, come up with basically a new baseline, and then the index would apply to that point moving forward. I guess our proposal would be to do the catch-up, since that'll apply to fees until we have a new fee calculation. Alternatively, you could hold them at zero, make no change. That would be another alternative.
Do you have more slides, or was that?
I mean, we have a breakdown or a tabulation of
Yeah,
what
that's right.
the fees will be
Oh, that's right. Okay.
if you wanted to see that. That's it recalculated. I think the memo made reference to the change in fee on a single-family home. If we adopted the 4.44%, if you took the example of a single-family home with a square footage of between 1,800 and 2,400 square feet, that would increase the fee by $294.
Other questions?
And
Okay.
that tabulation shows what the new fees would be by every category that we charge them against.
Well, I'm definitely supportive of catching back up and implementing the 4.44% increase, knowing that, this is to fund projects that add capacity to our roads, and these projects add people to our roads. So also, to be honest, I mean, there are fewer dollars coming from the federal government. There's $200 million in transportation funds that were cut from CDOT this year. So we are likely not to see help from any of those areas. We need to take care of our roads, and this, I think it's the right time to catch up, because it also helps that it's not a huge increase, right? And so it puts us back at being whole, whereas we lost some dollars potentially last year. I don't think we're in a position any longer where we can afford to do that, lose dollars. So I'm very supportive of moving forward with this. Commissioner?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would agree with the statement just made. I'm also supportive of the 4.44%, whatever it is, catch up. And the only thing I would add to what was stated is my recollection of the discussion last year, coming up with a compromise, a middle ground, was at least in part related to the previous year was the reappraisal year. People were paying a lot on property taxes, and I think some of us were advocating, how do we strike some semblance of balance so it's not such major sticker price shock I think that was part of the discussion last year. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I think that was part of the discussion last year, remembering that these are on new homes and new commercial. And so, that makes a difference, but, yeah, I mean, it's not that we want to raise fees, but you're not doing it arbitrarily. We're working with the CDOT's metrics to be able to identify how much, the cost has gone up. So I wish it didn't go up for so many reasons, and it has. So I think that there again, I think you had to bring it forward because while it's under 5%, it technically isn't.
And so what we were proposing was that we would put this through on consent, just because technically, is this a 7% increase, or is it, I mean, effectively, it's 4.4% on the fee, but, so it would come through on a consent agenda item.
I think
For
that's
board
fine to see it
signature.
on consent agenda.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm also remembering in the memo, Mark, that regarding the reassessment of how we do the methodology, the calculation, that information would be available by the end of the year, and we'll have that conversation. Yeah.
Yes, you will be adopting a new transportation
Adopting.
capital expansion fee study,
That's right.
basically.
Thank you. I'm good.
Yeah, it's good to get those numbers right, and so it's good to relook at that periodically and make sure that we're doing things well. So, no, I appreciate this. Thank you for bringing it forward. We'll look forward to seeing it.
And Stephen, if you ever
soon.
miss us, you're welcome to come to a land use hearing.
He can't get away from some 1041s that he made the mistake of starting on.
Yeah. Thank you both. Rebecca, turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Rebecca Everett, Community Development Director. It's nice to be back in front of you after a few months away. I don't have much for you today, really just a check-in on our 3 o'clock land use hearing. There is the second reading of the NOCO Humane Animal Ordinance that Amy White will be providing. And then there are 3 items on the consent agenda, all of which will be covered by Cassidy Fiore today. And we have no indication at this time that anyone from the community is planning to pull or request those items to be pulled off consent. But as you know, that could always change.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's great to have you back. Any questions for Rebecca about this afternoon?
Don't have any questions, just want to reaffirm that it is great to have you back.
I echo that. It is great to have you back. And I guess the only question I have is, so the second reading of that ordinance, it is a public hearing, and we did, believe, announce at the last meeting that we would have public comment. Is that correct? I'm seeing Jenny. nod.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay, so we'll do that item first and then move on to the consent agenda, probably with the knowledge that there probably won't be a ton of public comment because we haven't received any emails or comments on it. I think people are largely in support, and other communities have done the same thing. So, but we'll make space for that public comment. Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Leslie.
Right, thank you. I'll echo too. It's great having her back. So really, I'll just give you a quick update on items that we anticipate for next week. At this point, I was going to bring to you some conversation around a fall water session for the community, and I'll have more information on that topic next week. So I'll bring it back then. It wasn't time sensitive for today, as well as coming back with information and a preview of some of the materials that we're getting from our team on the transportation funding project. I'll bring that next week to go through a PowerPoint and some information. And then also look for, on your individual calendars, we're reaching out to talk to you about stakeholders that we could connect with and get feedback and answer questions that you might have around some of those materials as well. So we'll have a few different opportunities, but we thought it would be useful to spend a little bit of time sharing some of that information with the public next week too, as it gets further refined and developed. So so that's ahead, and otherwise it's a kind of a short agenda for today and a quieter week. So we'll give you back a little bit of time.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, I neglected to ask, and maybe this is more of a Rebecca question, but can you say a little bit more about, we have a joint work session, I believe, this Wednesday. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yes, and I'll invite Jenny Axmaker up to provide just a brief overview of the topics that will be discussed. The work session this week will focus exclusively on some potential code updates in the land use code that planning has been working on.
Jenny Axmaker, Planning Manager. Yes, we have 3 potential code updates that we're going to bring for you. 2 of them will sound very familiar. They are the update for provisions to allow people to drill a well if they have a property over 35 acres within the areas of the county that are subject to a TAP moratorium currently. That is one of them. The other one relates to revising our noticing standards to give us some potential cost reduction in how we notify adjacent residents. It doesn't impact how we notify adjacent property owners, but trying to switch from a mailing where we're getting a lot of returned mail back to a signposting. So it'll be code updates related to that. And then the third one, I believe may have come at your request, but it's an update to allow the county or a public utility to install wildfire cameras on telecommunications topics without having to go through the appeal process. And it's for a very slim public agency. It's not similar to the private agencies that we heard the appeal on this past fall. So it's code amendments related to those 3 topics.
Thank you. Any other questions, Commissioner? No? Okay. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks. All right. That's it, right? Okay. Well, thank you all. We'll look forward to some of those updates next week around the water program and then transportation. And we will see some of you this afternoon at 3 for the land use hearing. So, but as of 2:02, we are adjourned. Thank you.